Hello everyone, and welcome to my Soap Twist 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. The afternoon sun poured through the blinds in Katie Logan's modern new workplace, casting long shadows on the mood boards and fabric samples that suddenly defined her world. The air still smelled faintly of new paint and possibilities, a far cry from the gleaming hallways of Forrester Creations, where she had spent so many years in the shadow of her sister's history. Katie had always been the quieter Logan sister, the one who watched more than she demanded, but recently, the fire inside her had become impossible to suppress. Bill's gift, which the fashion firm handed over as a wedding present, had changed everything. It was hers to shape and prove anything with. Deke Sharp had just walked through the door, marking the first genuine step in that direction. She had only recently met him, during one of those fortuitous encounters that Los Angeles seemed to produce at an alarming rate. Deke had been let go from Forrester when Thomas's homecoming shifted priorities, and Katie had noticed something in him, an ambition that echoed her own, a quiet drive to overcome the concerns others had about him. He was young, creative, and his ideas had a fresh edge that she knew the market desired. More crucially, he was Deacon Sharp's son, making him Hope's half-brother and tying him into the tangled web of family relationships in which Katie had spent her entire life. Hiring him felt like a statement, not just a commercial decision. They had met for coffee at Il Giardino, Deacon's restaurant where Deke had temporarily settled after leaving Forrester. The talk had flowed effortlessly. Deke spoke of his aspirations with zeal, reminding Katie of her younger self, before life had imposed caution on her desires. She had listened as he detailed the frustration of being overlooked, the sting of rejection from those who should have welcomed new ideas. Katie had told her own experience about how Brooke's success had always loomed big, and how her recent marriage to Bill was met with rumors that she was simply regaining something others had taken for granted. By the conclusion of the meal, they recognized they were kindred spirits, two people who had been underestimated and were determined to show everyone wrong. Katie had made the proposition right there. Lead designer for her new brand, with the opportunity to create something wholly his own under the Logan banner. Deke accepted with a grin that lighted up his face, the type of real excitement that filled Katie's heart with purpose. This was her chance to create something genuine, unaffected by Brooke's shadow or Ridge's influence. She could almost taste triumph. But as the days passed and the preparations intensified, Katie found herself lured more into Deke's world. She learnt more about his biography, including his troubled beginnings, being shuttled between families as a child, and the remaining issues about identity that seemed to mirror her own lifelong insecurities. He spoke of Deacon with compassion and impatience, the father who had fought for custody, nurtured him through difficult times, and had eventually found some stability with Sheila Carter, of all people. Katie had always viewed Deacon with suspicion. He had injured Brooke terribly in the past and fathered Hope in a moment of treachery. Deke, on the other hand, offered a different picture, of a father who had matured and attempted to do the right thing for his son. After a long day of sketching and brainstorming, Katie invited Deke to supper. It was informal, just the two of them and some takeout from their favorite Italian restaurant. Bill was abroad on business, so the house felt peaceful and almost too huge. As they sat on the patio, viewing the city lights, Deke opened up more. He talked of his mother, Becky Moore, who died when he was a child, leaving him with memories that were more fiction than facts. He described how he was once known as Little Eric and how there had been swaps, falsehoods, and custody battles that sounded like something out of a soap opera script, which was appropriate given the society they lived in. Katie listened and nodded, feeling an unexpected connection. She has her own history of paternity mysteries and children caught up in emotional crossfires. But while Deke spoke, something bothered her, a detail that didn't quite fit. He referred to Deacon as Dad without difficulty, yet there was hesitancy when he cited specific times and absences. Katie had always been skilled at reading between the lines, which had helped her endure years of being unnoticed. She began to question, softly at first, if there was more to Deke's narrative than he realized. The idea developed over the next few days. She found herself examining old Forrester archives, uncovering ancient information from the time Deacon initially entered their lives. She remembered the scandals, Becky, Amber, and the baby swap that had shattered the family. Little Eric had been at the center of it, as claimed by Amber and Rick, until the truth was revealed. He was Becky's son with Deacon. But Katie had long ago learned that in their society, truths might change, records may be incomplete, and people could rewrite history to suit their own purposes. Katie sat alone with a stack of documents one afternoon while Deke went out to source fabrics. She had contacted a trusted contact for access to old medical files. Nothing illegal, simply contacts built over years in the field. What she discovered made her stomach plummet. A blood type discrepancy, a note from a previously unpublicized paternity confirmation. The dates did not completely match Deacon's time frame. There was a small but real chance that Deacon was not Deke's biological father at all. Katie's hands trembled as she reread the report. It suggested another man, someone ancillary, someone who had vanished from the plot years before. The consequences were astounding. If real, Deke's entire sense of self, his relationship with Hope as half-siblings, and his place in the Sharp family could disintegrate. Katie would be the one clutching the thread that could pull everything apart. She paced her office, her heart pounding. Horror swept over her in waves. This wasn't simply talk or supposition. It was a bomb ready to go off. Deke trusted her and looked to her as a mentor and ally. He had confided in her about his insecurities and need to belong. Telling him would break that. Not informing him would chew away at her conscience indefinitely. She thought about Deacon, who had fought so hard for the boy he thought was his. What would happen to him? To Hope, who had only recently started to accept his long-lost brother. Katie sank into her chair, gazing at the city below. She wanted to create something new and honest. Instead, she had discovered a secret that may destroy lives. It weighed more heavily on her than any corporate conflict she had ever faced. She imagined Deke's expression when she told him, confusion, anguish, and betrayal. She anticipated the consequences. Deacon's rage, Hope's anguish, and how the Logans and Forresters would once again be ripped apart by long-buried secrets. But she couldn't unsee it. The evidence appeared cold and clinical on the page. Katie had always taken pride in doing the right thing, even when it hurt. But this felt different, cruel, irreversible. She thought of her own children and how far she had gone to protect them. Was this protection or destruction? Hours have passed. The light fell lower, filling the room with mocking golden hues. Katie pulled up her phone, her fingers hovering over Deke's number. She could phone him right now, ask him to come over, and deliver the news gently. Or she may conceal it, pretend she never looked, and accept the deception as fact. However, lies always surfaced in their environment. She put the phone down. Not yet. She needed more proof and certainty. But deep down, she knew. The horror wasn't only the finding, it was the understanding that she now had the ability to change everything. And in their tight-knit community of love, tragedy, and infinite second chances, that power felt like the most crushing burden of all. As night fell, Katie sat in the faint light with the report still open on her desk. The metropolis twinkled outside, oblivious to the storm gathering inside. She had come to Los Angeles looking for an opportunity to reinvent herself and walk out of the shadows. Instead, she had discovered a shadow darker than any she had ever seen, one that threatened to devour not just her dreams, but also the fragile bonds that kept so many people together. The decision loomed. To speak, to destroy illusions, or to remain mute and let the past be undisturbed. Katie Logan Spencer, who had previously been satisfied to watch from the sidelines, was now at the center of a revelation that had the potential to redefine family. And in that moment, she realized the true cost of ambition. Sometimes the price was not triumph, but the agony of unpalatable realities. Katie sat alone in the silence of the living room, the table lamp's illumination throwing long shadows that seemed to reflect the dread in her chest. For days, something felt odd. It wasn't simply a faint intuition or the lingering concern she'd become accustomed to over the years. It was sharper, heavier, like a truth pressing against the inside of her ribs, wanting to be recognized. When she discovered the truth about Deke's biological father, she was taken aback and left speechless. She had believed, like many others, that the solution would be simple. Deacon Sharp was the obvious choice. After all, Deacon's tangled history, reckless decisions, and undeniable link to Sheila Carter made him an ideal candidate. Everyone in Los Angeles seemed willing to accept that explanation, and Katie had first agreed with it. It fit easily into the story that they all understood. However, the truth, as it frequently occurred in their world, was considerably more disturbing. The revelation occurred quietly and without fanfare. A misplaced document. A murmured affirmation from someone she trusted. A name that should never have been assigned to a youngster like Deke. Katie's hands trembled as she read the words before her. This was not only surprising, it was scary. The man named as Deke's biological father was not Deacon. It was someone far more deadly, complex, and intertwined with the darkest moments of their common history. Her thoughts raced as she attempted to comprehend the consequences. Deke, a child with his entire life ahead of him, unknowingly carried the blood of a guy whose very name sent shivers down her spine. Katie had fought for years to keep her family safe from instability, controversy, and the never-ending cycle of betrayal that defined their existence. This reality threatened to ruin all she had tried so hard to keep together. She thought about Sheila, of course. Sheila was usually in the thick of disasters like these, her influence spreading like a deadly stain. However, even Sheila felt that this disclosure went too far. Katie wondered if Sheila completely realized the ramifications of her actions. Did she know all along? Or had she been as oblivious to the truth as everyone else? As Katie relived the events leading up to this point, minor things began to jump out. Things that had previously seemed incomprehensible suddenly made sense. Deke's disposition. His eyes flashed with intensity. Sheila appeared both protective and strangely detached from him, as if she was terrified of what he may become. Katie trembled as she realized these characteristics might not have come from Sheila alone. The identity of Deke's biological father held an almost unbearable weight. This man wasn't merely a tortured soul or a repentant sinner like Deacon. He left a history of deception, brutality, and ruin. Someone who left a path of damaged lives in his wake. Katie had hoped to never deal with him again. Her initial inclination was to protect Bill. Bill had already experienced his fair share of shocks and betrayals, particularly from Sheila. Learning that Deke was linked to this individual may throw him over the edge. Katie was aware of Bill's wrath and impetuous, emotion-driven decisions. She was concerned about what he would do if he discovered the truth without enough time to prepare. However, keeping such a secret was impossible. In their environment, secrets always surfaced at the worst possible time, frequently with disastrous repercussions. Katie paced the room, caught between wanting to protect her loved ones and having to disclose the truth. She understood that once this information was released, nothing would ever be the same. Her thoughts turned to Deke himself. The youngster was innocent throughout, a pawn in a game he had no idea was being played. Katie's heart wrenched for him. She pondered how this knowledge would shape his destiny, how it would affect his sense of self once he realized where he came from. Would he be able to shake the shadow of his biological father's past, or would he be doomed to repeat the same destructive patterns? Katie recalled the first time she had met Deke. There was something disconcerting beneath his charm, something that made her uncomfortable even as she attempted to dismiss it. Now she knew why. Bloodlines were important in their civilization not because they defined who a person had to be, but because they frequently carried expectations, assumptions, and biases that were impossible to overcome. The more she considered it, the angry she felt. Sheila's irresponsibility makes me angry. Angry with the dad for inadvertently passing on his DNA to a child who deserved better. Angry at herself for hoping that their lives might be easy, that they could move on without the past resurfacing. Katie understood that revealing the truth would start off a chain reaction. Ridge, Brooke, Taylor, and the rest of their group would be affected. Old wounds would reopen. Long-buried grudges would surface. The delicate peace they had managed to keep would be shattered, replaced by distrust and fear. She pondered confronting Sheila directly. The sight of Sheila's face, when confronted with the truth, almost calmed her worries. But Sheila was unpredictable, and Katie had learned the hard way that underestimating her was a risky move. If Sheila knew Katie had learned the truth, she would go to any length to safeguard her secret, even if it meant hurting people around her. As night fell, Katie began to recall recollections of Deke's father. Memories she wants to forget. The manipulation, the falsehoods, and the turmoil he had caused in their lives. She had seen him break families apart without remorse, always landing on his feet while others suffered the consequences. The thought of his blood flowing through Deke was nearly too much to take. Katie pondered if fate was cruel or just ironic. They had assumed Sheila's presence in their lives couldn't get much worse, but this discovery proved them wrong. It was as if the cosmos was trying them to see how much more they could take before cracking. She sat down and pressed her palms on her temples, attempting to think rationally. What was the best method to deal with this? Who had to know first? How could she limit the damage? There were no simple solutions, only unpleasant choices. Telling Bill seemed unavoidable. Despite their difficult history, she trusted Bill to handle the truth, even if he needed time to comprehend it. She mentally rehearsed the talk, anticipating his amazement, incredulity, and rage. She was concerned that he would rush for Sheila or the perpetrator, sparking an out-of-control altercation. Then there was Brooke. Brooke had always been at the center of their family dramas, her reactions unpredictable but intensely emotional. Learning the truth about Deke's parentage would break her heart, especially if it meant facing yet another tragic chapter in their shared history. Katie also considered the bigger consequences. What does this mean legally? Would the biological father have any right to Deke? The idea made her stomach turn. She couldn't face the thought of that man imposing himself on Deke's life, ruining it with his influence. As the hours passed, Katie realized there was no going back. The truth was now out there, at least for her, and it needed to be acknowledged. She couldn't forget what she knew, and she couldn't pretend it didn't matter. For better or worse, this knowledge would change their lives. She stood up, determined to manage the situation as best she could. She would gather the information, corroborate the specifics, and confront Sheila when it was appropriate. She would warn and prepare Bill for what was to come. She would do all in her ability to defend Deke, even if it meant making enemies in the process. But underlying her will, fear lurked. Fear of the unknown. Fear for the man whose identity has emerged in the most unexpected manner. Fear that history would repeat itself, bringing them all back into a nightmare from which they had just recently escaped. Katie peered out the window, and the city lights twinkled in the distance. Los Angeles had always been a place of reinvention and second chances. She hoped desperately that Deke would be able to carve his own path, free of his father's misdeeds. But she understood how merciless their world could be and how swiftly optimism might be dashed by the weight of the past. Katie felt fatigued yet determined as morning approached. The horror of the finding had not vanished, but it had heightened her feeling of duty. She couldn't change who Deke's biological father was, but she could control what occurred next. She could battle for the truth, accountability, and the safety of those she cared about. The days ahead would be difficult. There would be arguments, accusations, and misery. Trust would be tested, alliances would change, and nothing would ever be the same again. But Katie knew one thing for sure: ignoring the truth was not an option. She took a long breath, bracing herself for the fury she was about to unleash. The identity of Deke's biological father was a secret that could no longer be kept hidden, and when it was revealed, everyone would be forced to confront the repercussions of previous decisions. Whether they were prepared or not, the truth would emerge, and Katie would stand firm, determined to see it through to the finish.